amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello, listeners, and welcome. Today, my guest is someone I've known for many, many years, Jill Henry. Jill not only is the matriarch of one of Australia's great sailing families, she has had a long and successful career in finance. Jill majored in economics at Sydney University, leading to a 30-year career in investment analysis and funds management, including Vice President in the Funds Management Division of Bankers Trust Australia and General Management Responsibility in the Industrial Labour Hire Family Company Action Workforce. She is now retired, but still works tirelessly as a board member for the Northcare Foundation in Sydney, which promotes excellence in education and clinical research within intensive care medicine. Jill and her husband Dave have been sailing together for over 50 years and not long ago completed a circumnavigation of the world in their wonderful bosun yacht Sweet Chariot. Before that, they circumnavigated Australia and Tasmania. Dave completed the double-handed Sydney to Hobart yacht race after celebrating his 80th birthday, possibly one of the oldest men to do so, and their son Rupert has twice won the same double-handed section of the Sydney to Hobart in his yacht, Minstrel, a Lombard 34. Rupert, who represented Australia in 420s and 470s, has also acclaimed honours in the 500 nautical mile Melbourne to Osaka yacht race in record time and completed in many overseas races, including notorious Route the Rum, a single-handed transatlantic race which takes place every 4 years. Rupert's son and Jill and Dave's grandson, Otto, is two-time Australian Opti champion and presently sails 49ers, including recently in the 54th Princess Sophia Regatta in Mallorca, Spain. Welcome, Jill.
Thank you, Ro. And let me say, first of all, congratulations to 4RBH on wonderful work that you do.
Oh, thank you, Jill. That's lovely. But now, and Paul there, our producer, who's behind the glass there doing it with us, which is great. What an incredible career you've had and what an incredible sailing family you're part of. But before we actually get into the sailing part, please do tell us a little about yourself, where you grew up and how you got into the world of finance.
I grew up in Wollongong. I'm a girl from the gong, as they say.
Yeah.
And I had a very good childhood. My parents really looked after us. They gave us every opportunity, including, I must say, Wollongong. Well, first of all, Wollongong is such a pretty place, and it's called, it's situated between the sea and the mountains, and it has a motto called Urbs inter mare motemque, which is the Latin for city between the sea and the mountains. And I say that because I went to a Catholic convent for the first 7 years of my schooling, and my teacher in 5th and 6th grade was a wonderful teacher, and she gave me such a fantastic background in English grammar that Latin became my best subject in secondary school.
Tremendous. So now your time at Bankers Trust must have been fascinating, and then, of course, you set up Action Workforce.
Yes, Bankers Trust, before that was the last one in the investment world. I started off as an analyst after I finished economics and with a very large stockbroking company. And I was the only female resource company analyst. Was very appropriate. Was in the second half of the 60s when the mining boom was on. And so I became quite well known in the industry, being the only female resource company analyst. And I went on from there then to become research director of Godfrey Weston, which is now Godfrey Pembroke.
Right.
And I set up the research department there. And we became quite a force within the financial advisory industry.
You used to have a shift on a radio too, didn't you?
I did.
So you're back behind the microphone, so to say.
I am. Actually, my first foray behind the microphone was when I was about 11, and I won a competition in Wollongong on road safety, and I was on 2WL.
Oh.
And I remember the opening sentence was, "Death is so permanent."
Oh, well, it's quite true, isn't it? We're all trying to avoid it. But now, Jill, tell me, what piqued your interest in sailing? I mean, was it after you met Dave, or were you a sailor before that?
I've only just learned from that article that you've just read. I actually started offshore racing before David, and with the boyfriend of the time, and we were sailing on a boat offshore, and it was a beautiful boat, but leaked like a sieve. But I thought that being my first foray into offshore racing, I thought all sailing boats leak like that, and we'd have to even go into our bunks with wearing our wet weather gear because the boat had been built by a house builder, and he forgot to put all the sticky stuff that you need to have between the deck saloon and the deck.
Okay.
So it leaked like Zeb, and the water used to rise up towards the settee. But anyway, they were not good sailors, and my boyfriend at the time said, I've got a friend from rugby who's a very good sailor. Let's get him along.
Right.
And that's how I met David.
Oh, how wonderful. And your son, Rupert, now, he says he first sailed on a boat when he was a few months old. And then, of course, Luke, your other son, was only very little as well when he got his sea legs, so to speak. So you certainly started them young, didn't you?
Well, I actually started Rupert in utero at 8 months when we sailed up from Port Hacking to Sydney Harbour on our first boat, all called Sweet Chariot.
Yes.
It was a Little Endeavour 24, so he got his sailing in utero, and likewise Luke. They both started their sailing in utero.
And you used to actually, I think about that time, Jill, was it sail out to Lord Howe and a couple of the islands? Or?
Yes, after we sold the Endeavour, and David and I built a Swanson 32.
Right.
We laid up the hull up in the Swanson factory and then had it delivered down to our house, and we built it from there. And then when the boys were aged 4 and 5 and 5 and 6, yes, we sailed with them to Lord Howe Island return.
And when you first started sailing, did you ever imagine that you and David would pack up and sail right around the world together?
We knew we'd do long distance. And so when the opportunity came, and we were by then able to get a Busan 48, which is a magnificent cruising boat.
Australian built, isn't it?
Australian built, yes. And so then we decided, we went around Australia. First of all, David said he wanted to go sail to the Med. And I said, before we do that, because we had done a lot of coastal sailing, we should sail around Australia because it's unique being an island, continent, etc. So we did that to celebrate Matthew Flinder's bicentenary of circumnavigating Australia. And because he's my hero, James Cook is David's, Matthew Flinders is mine.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So we did that, and then David said, let's sail to the Mediterranean, and which we did. And then, but I like having goals. And I said, well, we're not just going to sail to the Mediterranean. We may as well keep going and sail around the world.
Yes.
And so we did. But we spent 7 years, not continuous. We spent about 7 months on the boat in the Med and then fly home for 5 months during the European winter. So 7 years, or 7 seasons, I guess you should say, in the Mediterranean, and then we set sail home.
And before that, of course, you'd circumnavigated Tasmania. And Rob, my husband Rob, and I were lucky enough to sail with you on our yacht down to Port Davey, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world, isn't it? Right down in the southern wilderness of Tasmania.
Absolutely. It is wonderful. And also, that's when you met Rupert. And Charlotte, your daughter, met Rupert. And that's Charlotte said to me, I have a friend Rupert might be suitable for or whatever. Anyway, sure enough, that's how he met his gorgeous wife, Sarah.
And we will talk about the result of that, which is Otto, who's also a top sailor. We'll come to Otto a little bit later. But now, Jill, I'm sure our listeners would be interested to know, what do you do sort of preparing for a huge, long trip like that, going across the world? Now, I know you stop in various places. And how do you sort of stock up the boat? Do you have a basic food list that you refer to for long trips? And, as I said, of course, it wasn't your first long trip. So do you have it down pat?
I think I do. You have to keep lists because you've got to keep a list of where everything is stored. Otherwise, you hunt forever.
Yes.
And the Busans have quite a large storing capacity. I didn't really concentrate on too much. We have a very large refrigerator system, and so I was able to have lots of frozen vegetables, things like that, which was really good. So I was able to keep up my supply. But going around the world, particularly on the way there, probably it was easy to replenish supplies along the way. The longest was when we actually stocked up in Puerto Rico, actually, and I actually bought at Costco there, huge number of things, which actually placed us in good stead for actually coming through Panama and across the Pacific. And so I had the space to be able to.
And crewvacking is good, isn't it?
Crewvacking for the meat.
Yes,
is very, very good.
Which is vacuum packed.
Yes, exactly. And a lot of in certain places, the butchers will do that for you when they know you're on a boat.
Which is terrific. But Jill, you went into pretty remote places. I remember sort of keeping track of you and whatever. Some of them were pretty unsafe sailing waters, in fact. Were you scared at all? And tell us about anything that might have been, scary.
No, I wasn't really scared. A lot of the people get said they're being approached by pirates all the time, which is actually just fishermen, particularly on the way from Australia through to the Mediterranean. You meet fishermen all the time, and they're out there trying to eke out a living catching fish, and they'd approach your boat, and all they wanted was water. And we have a very big desalination system, so I had put on board lots of empty 1 litre bottles. I was able to fill up these bottles. But then places that were dangerous, well, you probably wouldn't go there now, but we loved, probably the highlight was once we got to the Middle East and after going from India across the Arabian Sea to Oman and then into Yemen.
Yes.
And Yemen we love, and then Eritrea and Sudan in the Red Sea.
Right.
They were outstanding.
Yes.
But we had one problem in the Gulf of Aden when we were approached by pirates. Yeah,
right.
Potential pirates.
Yes. Well, I read not long ago about a huge cruise ship that was approached by pirates. In fact, there was a huge cruise ship that just left Australia and was sailing to Singapore, I think, just recently. Had to tell everybody to turn all their lights off and whatever. I think it was on the queue, one of the Queen Mary or Queen Anne or whatever.
Really?
But yes, it's obviously something that sailors have got to keep an eye out, no matter where you are.
Yeah, true. Well, when in Salalah in Oman,
yes.
you always plan to go in convoy. So we're towards the end of the season. So there are 6 yachts, and each yacht is assigned a role. And you don't talk on the VHF, you don't have lights on at night, or that sort of thing. But then when we left and we're in the Gulf of Aden, we're at the narrowest point between Yemen and the Somalia. Yes. And sure enough, 3 boats came out. They're like big surf boats with outboard motors. Yeah. And so the strategy was, because you have these strategy meetings prior to leaving Oman, to come together. And we were motoring, no wind, which also makes you more vulnerable. And so we came even closer together. They positioned themselves around us with the 6 boats in the middle, and we thought, well, I wonder what they'll do. They'll probably isolate a boat.
Yes.
And the practice then was to strip the boat of anything they could use. And we thought it'd probably be us because we had the largest boat. Yeah. But would you believe over the horizon we saw this large ship, and the guy in charge, the boat in charge of radio, called up, and after a long silence, this beautiful British voice said, "Hello, we are watching you on radar, and we agree the situation looks rather threatening. We're on our way."
Oh,
it was a bit like the cavalry coming over the horizon.
Oh, gosh, what a relief, absolutely. Yeah. But Jill, now I know when Rob and I were in the Med for many, many years, checking in and out of countries is every country's got their own peculiarity and whatever, hasn't it? And you obviously had to do that everywhere you went.
Yes, we actually, particularly in the more remote countries, India was quite an experience. We really enjoyed that. Yes. But it actually, when you arrive in your own boat, it's quite different to arriving on a plane or a cruise ship. You're actually into the culture immediately. Yes. And that's what we loved about it. And we'd had no adverse experiences at all checking in, even in the remote.
It just takes a lot of time.
It takes a lot of time. But Eritrea, Sudan... we had problems in Syria because we did do the Middle East, which not many yachts in the Mediterranean do, Australian yachts.
Right.
But Syria we had problems, but otherwise... and also we had to be very careful when we were in Lebanon, going down to Israel, etc.
Right, yes. But even coming back into Australia now, Jill, they've made that much more stringent, haven't they? The forms and everything that you need. I think in the old days you could sort of come in and then sort of check in a bit later, but I think now you've more or less got to let them know weeks or certainly a long time ahead that you're coming in.
Yes, we had to let them know. I think it was up 3 weeks.
Right.
But they're very efficient. We came into Brisbane, actually, and they're very efficient. And you aren't allowed to leave your boat until they come on board.
Right, yes. Yeah. You fly a flag for those, that are listening,
do.
to show that you've just arrived, and a special flag. And then when you have checked in, you can fly the flag of that the country and whatever.
Yes, and they have this terrific coastal watch, particularly on the north of Australia. which is really impressive, actually. And they'd monitor us, and then they get to know you.
Yeah.
And they'd call up, "Oh, hello, sweet chariot, that's you down below. How are you?"
That's right. I think, well, yes, we got chased once and they had to check who we were. You're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is Jill Henry, who, after retiring from a career in business, has sailed around the world with her husband and is part of a very, famous sailing family. Now, when you were sailing from the Galapagos Islands, you lost your rudder. Now, that was a pretty scary time, I would have imagined.
Yeah, that was a challenge. I think we should be in the Guinness Book of Records for doing the longest sail without a rudder. That was 2,000 miles, because that's the biggest leg of our whole circumnavigation from the Galapagos to the Marquesas, 3,000 miles, roughly 6,000 kilometres. And after 1,000 miles in very strong trade winds, we heard this big bang and rounded up, and we put on a harness for David to go down, and sure enough, no rudder. So it had snapped at a very vulnerable point in the rudder stock.
Right.
And
What a terrible feeling.
We thought we had three options. Abandon ship. We thought, no, that's not us.
Yes.
Second, go back towards Galapagos.
Right.
That they didn't have any facilities there, and that was upwind, so that's
Yes.
not really an option. So we thought, okay, let's just handle it and go another 2,000 miles to the Marquesas, which we did. And we deployed the appropriate sea anchor and various other things, and went the 2,000 miles without a rudder, which is a pretty erratic sort of ride.
My husband Rob tells everyone it's the longest trip that that the world has ever known.
Yes, and then if you look
at Noah, I think
exactly,
it was
exactly. And if you look at the route in detail, it is incredibly erratic.
Yeah.
And yes.
Now, Rupert, your eldest son, has forged a very successful sailing career, hasn't he? He's won the Sydney to Hobart twice in the double-handed, and he also does a lot of offshore sailing, including the Osaka double-handed, single-handed race. No, double-handed. Double-handed. Yes, no, sorry, the one that he's the route to Rum is single-handed, isn't it? But at one stage, we were all very interested because in the double-handed Sydney to Hobart, not only was Rupert sailing with a companion on his boat, but David, your husband, who was over 80 at that stage, he was also sailing in the double-handed race, and it was quite a competition, wasn't it?
It was, yes. Yes, David is an obsessive sailor, as you know, and he was the oldest in the fleet, but in the two-handed division, which is quite admirable.
Yes, absolutely. And Rupert has won it twice, hasn't he?
Three now.
Oh, three times
Three
now.
times. He just won the last one. And the two-handed. His ultimate game, not a competitive lad, is he, is to win the Hobart race overall.
Oh, right.
And he came sixth the year before overall and ninth last time, but it really is a 1 in 10 opportunity. It really depends on the weather. The smaller boats, his boat's only 34 feet, so it depends on the weather situation.
Yes.
And so 1 in 10, he might. Depends. Right. You never know.
Well, the problem now, of course, is there's such huge maxis, aren't there, that are there. And they finish it so quickly. I mean, they've hardly left Sydney Harbour. Well, you and I actually watched them leave, didn't we, this year, or at the end of last year. And before you bat an eyelid, they're coming into Hobart. Whereas in the old days, at least it sort of took till close to New Year's Eve, didn't it?
Yes,
and it was a great celebration. But now it's become different.
It has, but also the weather conditions favour the big yachts, and they might get there first, but they generally don't win on handicap. But the following winds really help them, and it's because of the weather patterns. There's a hell of a lot of luck in the Sydney Hobart race because the weather patterns change. So if you're a smaller boat, you generally get adverse. If you get favourable conditions initially, which favour the big yachts, and then they change, and the smaller yachts are handicapped once more. So there's a lot of luck, probably 20-25% luck.
I couldn't agree more because I've actually been out on the Derwent when, years and years ago when I can't remember the name of the boat, but was miles ahead of any other boat and, of course, got into the Derwent and got totally becalmed and lost the race. And that often happens, isn't it? You can be hours and hours ahead and then go into the Derwent and that's it.
Yes.
Somebody comes up behind and pips you to the post. Now, Rupert, of course, started in Opties, didn't he?
He started when we went to live in the US.
Yes.
When he was 8 years of age,
yes.
He got into the Opties there, which was by far the biggest class in the world, dinghy class in the world then, but not in Australia. And so he did well there. And then we came back, and the Opties weren't big in Australia, so he then he wanted a competitive class, so he went into Flying Ants, which was a two-man boat, a very good little dinghy to learn on because they have a little spinnaker and everything.
Is that what Otto first sailed on when he became competitive?
No, he went to the Opties and then 420s, 470s.
Oh, of course, that's right, yes. So now he's doing particularly well, isn't he, as well, in the worldwide sailing scene?
Yes, he is. He's doing very well. He came 5th in the world's 420s, at one of which is the highest position ever.
Yes.
Yes, he's doing very well. He's a very humble lad, and he doesn't talk much about it. And, so he's doing well, and he's just competed offshore, overseas in the 49ers.
Yes.
But actually he also, which he wouldn't tell you about, but I'm going to say it, he just came 3rd in the worlds in the foiling moths.
Oh, wow.
Which is an unbelievable boat.
Gosh, those foiling boats are incredible.
Yes, they did.
How big is a moth?
Oh, golly, about 14 feet, I suppose.
Right,
and
right.
I'm not quite sure.
I
stand corrected there.
But the
yes.
big ones, I mean, they're hardly yachts, are they? I mean, they're like space machines.
Yes, they are. They get up in there and they do 30, 40 Ks, unbelievably fast.
Right. Yeah. So, Jill, now, I know you and Dave continue to do a lot of sailing, but you're also very, very involved. You're on the board of North Care Foundation, which, as I've said before, promotes excellence in education and research into the intensive care medicine. Do you want to fill us in a little bit more about that?
Yes, this is to do with the Royal North Shore Hospital, which is one of the largest public hospitals in Sydney. And the head of ICU back in the late 90s was a friend of ours, and he was having huge trouble getting sufficient nurses. Now, the ICU is a one-on-one care. Yes. You have to be critically ill to get in there. And so he was really struggling and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. So that a group of us all decided to form this foundation and to start raising money and giving scholarships to graduate nurses who wanted to come into ICU.
Right.
And they will then, after 6 months or so, when they decide they do want to stay in ICU, we will give them scholarships to do their postgrad year in critical care, their certificate. And then, if they want to continue studying, we're giving them the opportunity to progress within the nursing profession, where they can thereby do their masters.
Right.
And some of them do it in more in ICU as well, and they become nurse practitioners.
Oh, okay.
So we have about 8 nurse practitioners within the ICU unit now.
Right.
Within the North Shore Hospital, which is really impressive. Now, nurse practitioners, for the listeners who don't know, are a bridge between the intensive care nurses and the doctors.
Oh,
they have increased responsibility. So it's a nice progression path for them as well.
So it's a wonderful foundation.
It is because, yes, you have to have – it's a big unit, 58 beds. It's one of the biggest in Australia.
Right.
And one-on-one intensive care, and the stress within an ICU unit is incredible. And COVID added to that stress. So after what they had to go through to make sure they were properly clothed before they could enter into all the rooms, or individual rooms, before they could enter, was added to the stress when the alarms would go off. They couldn't just rush in. They had to put on all this gear. And you could see the stress increasing during that COVID time, which was incredible. Yes. So there's a huge attrition in the number of nurses post-COVID.
Right.
And so we've really had to work hard. We normally give about 25 scholarships a year.
Right.
And we're working really hard to address the situation and to bring numbers back up.
How terrific. And you and David, of course, are still sailing constantly, and you go up to Hamilton Island Race Week most years, don't you? Tell us a little bit about that, because I know a lot of people were actually recording this in the studios in Brisbane here, although it goes all around Australia, but a lot of people from all around Australia go up to Hamilton Island Race Week. So give us a little indication of what that's like.
It's good fun. I enjoy getting up there more than the actual race week.
Yeah, all right.
Our boat is not a racing boat, really, but we do well enough because when we get handicapped sufficiently.
Yes.
But it's the actual going up from Sydney to Hamilton Island, I enjoy the most. We normally see you on the route, which is terrific.
Yeah.
And once you're there, and we always 2 couples come up from Sydney and join us there. And so we always rent a unit, and we race. We race in a certain division. Normally was the spinnaker division, and now we've gone into non-spinnaker for the last year.
Yeah.
which is much more relaxed.
Oh.
Very competitive, but relaxed.
I wish our listeners could see Jill, because she's she's tiny, really. Well, not tiny, but there's not a lot of her, always beautifully dressed, I might add. But if you see her rushing from one end of the boat, Paul, you can imagine that, one end of the boat to the other, putting up sails and bringing in winches and whatever. She's an absolute force of nature, whether it's going around the world or whether it's up at Hamilton Island Raceway. But Jill, now tell us a little bit about Route de Rome. Route de Rome, how do you say that? That's what Rupert's
Route
said.
de Rome.
Yep.
Yeah, he hopes to do it again next year.
Yes.
And you have to have a certain, despite the history of your background in sailing,
Yep.
number of miles you've done, you still have to do a certain number within 12 months preceding the Route de Rome. So he's busily over in Europe now.
Yes.
And he's about to start in a couple of weeks the Normandy Channel race, which is a two-handed race.
Yes.
And then he's going to do the Azores race, which is a two-handed one-way
Yes.
and a single-handed back. This is back to France.
Right.
And then next year he will go and do the Route de Rome. Route de Rome.
Yes.
He's determined to do that before he stops.
Actually, I must remind our listeners that in a Float magazine this month, isn't it?
Yes.
There's a lovely article about the Henry family and all the sailing there, but you can read about that. Now, this year, of course, was the Australian Wooden Boat Show Festival in Hobart, and a number of boats from here go down there. And have you actually been there for, I know Sweet Chariot is not wooden, but have you been there to be part of this wonderful thing?
Yes, no, we didn't go this year,
Yeah.
but we've been several times.
Yeah.
And yes, I agree. And a friend of ours lives in Sandy Bay, so we always go there to watch the
Yeah.
parade of sail. And we're very interested, having built a boat ourselves, we're very interested in people who
Yes.
have built their own wooden boats, because
Yeah.
that is such a craft. And it's a dying craft, unfortunately,
It is.
in
and-
Australia.
Yeah. But Tasmania is certainly one of the foremost in wooden boats, and we were lucky enough to be part of the very first wooden boat festival with a very old Tasmanian boat.
Yes, and you sailed that up from Hobart to
Yes,
Sydney.
yes. But it's really has put Tasmania on the map. And the first one, of course, only had very, very few boats, and now there's so many.
And then all done by volunteers, which is absolutely fantastic.
Well, I'm trying to get Andy Gamlin, actually, who started it on my show, so I
that'd be
must
good.
continue to do that. But now, Jill, what's in the future for the Henrys? Is there more sailing down the track, overseas sailing, or what's there?
Yes, we're both octogenarians now, which is sort of
I know, we're all getting up there. Yeah.
yes, well, we're off to go on a rally in the south of England in a couple of weeks, chartering a yacht there, but then we'll do Hamilton Island again
Right.
this year.
Yes.
Our crew from last year have already signed up, saying we're coming up, we're flying up. Well, please, can we do it? And we actually want to sail to Tasmania again, because some of our best sailing has been in Tasmania, as you said, going around
Yes.
to Port Davey, but also up in the north. It's just wonderful going up the river to
The Tamar River. and
up to the Launceston.
Yes.
We spent a week on the Tamar one, and it was just wonderful.
There are beautiful sailing waters.
And also the islands in Bass Strait, which
Yes.
we've been to most of them now, and Australians don't realise how many wonderful islands are in that area, Bass Strait area, but also off the coast of South Australia. We
Yes.
visited 40 islands off the coast of South Australia when we were going around Australia.
Yes.
And there's a lot of history involved in that as well. I mean, there's sheep farms there on these islands. And
magnificent sailing round. But it's not, and I take my hat off to you, it's not easy sailing down the west coast of Australia. There's certainly various winds coming from all directions there, aren't there? So,
yes, particularly big. We actually, that's probably one of the worst experience we had, in the sense that we left Exmouth to go down to Fremantle.
Yes.
And we had to get to Fremantle because we were flying home for Rupert and Sarah to be married.
Oh, right, yeah.
Anyway, so we left for Exmouth, and the fisherman said we wouldn't be going, so I assumed okay, we won't go, I'll have another glass of wine. And David said, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And he said, of course we're going. Anyway, it went from a strong wind to a gale warning, and the sou'wester built up, and we were knocked down. This is when the waves get really big,
Right.
and
Yes.
unfortunately, if you get on top of a wave, you're smashed down into a trough.
Right.
And that was probably one
Yes.
of the worst. Besides losing the rudder, probably the second worst experience.
It sounds horrendous. But, Jill, I could talk to you for hours here about sailing, and we might have to get you back again. But unfortunately, I think, Paul, we've run out of time, haven't we?
We certainly have.
Yeah. So Thank you, Jill Henry, businesswoman, philanthropist, sailor extraordinaire, and so very much more for being my guest today.
My pleasure, Ro. Thank you for having me.
Been an absolute pleasure. And this program was recorded in the studios of 4RBH Brisbane for syndication around Australia. And thank you, Paul, for being our producer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.